Okay, I think we can get started. Welcome, good morning everybody, and welcome to another intense day. We're not yet done with the real exchange rate. We're probably going to spend another 45 minutes on this, and then I'll go into the nominal exchange rate. And then we'll see how things evolve. So let me start by highlighting this equation that I presented yesterday in the morning and in the afternoon. This is a very useful dissection of the CPI-based real exchange rate, accounting for the fact that the CPI consists of traded and non-traded goods. And when we talk about traded goods, we have goods produced domestically and we have goods that we import. And all these things have an impact on the CPI. So what this equation does is basically telling you that the CPI may be driven by variations in the terms of trade. Now, these variations in the terms of trade, and please remember, the terms of trade is a relative price of the two different goods. These variations in the terms of trade, they affect the real exchange rate if we have different consumption baskets. If the consumption baskets are the same, so if theta H equals theta F, please remember theta H is the product, is the weight of the H country product in country H's goods basket, and theta F is the weight of the same good in the foreign country goods basket. Now, if these weights are the same, then this effect disappears. Now, we have good reason to believe that there's something called the home bias in consumption, which means that people tend to devote a larger share of their consumption to stuff that's produced domestically. The second part of this equation is deviations from the law of one price for a given good, right? Please note, this is the same good. This is good F, the price in the foreign country, in foreign currency. Now you turn it into the domestic currency using the exchange rate, and here you have the price of the same good in the home country, right? So the terms of trade is about two different goods. This is about the same good potentially having different prices in different countries. Here we have the home country good and its price in the foreign country, and here we have the same good and its price in the domestic economy. Now this may also drive the real exchange rate. And finally, we have the good old Balassa-Samuelson kind of thing, which is the relative price of tradables over non-tradables over tradables. And when we look at the real exchange rate, then these things, the real exchange rate might be driven by all these things. To make matters more interesting but also more complicated, these fluctuate. So observed real exchange rate fluctuations may be driven by real factors, fundamentals, that give rise to terms of trade fluctuations, that give rise to changing relative prices of non-traded goods, that may also give rise to deviations from the law of one price. But the real exchange rate may also be driven by monetary factors, namely the nominal exchange rate associated with slow adjustment of nominal prices. I'll come back to that. And there are some people emphasizing those real factors and some people emphasizing the monetary side. So that's what we did yesterday. I don't have to go back to it. Let me come back to the last thing I brought up yesterday in the afternoon, and I think it's very important. We talk about the real exchange rate. Sometimes people talk about the real exchange rate and they confuse it with the terms of trade. This is already a problem because it's wrong, right? Don't do that. The real exchange rate is bigger than the terms of trade. The terms of trade is an ingredient of the real exchange rate. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I defined the terms of trade as being the price of imported goods relative to the price of exported goods. Now, some people are very happy when this ratio goes up, and some people are very sad about it. Now, trade economists usually argue that if imported goods become more expensive relative to exported goods, that's bad. It's so-called a worsening of the terms of trade, because you have to deliver more exports for your imports, right? So you want to have your terms of trade improve, which means that you want to see the price of imports relative to exports go down. Now, another group of people says, no, we want to see the price of imports relative to the price of exports go up, because that's a gain in price competitiveness. So we want to sell our stuff cheaply because then we have a lot of customers. And we want to make the imported stuff expensive for domestic customers because we want to shift consumption from imported goods to domestic goods. Now, this is another side of the same coin, right? Now, how come? And the answer is in the trade world, usually those trade models, I don't know whether you have been exposed to them. Ricardo, Heckscher, Lin, all these models of international trade. These are usually full employment models. So everybody's got a job, and demand is not an issue. Now, if that's the case, then of course, you want to sell your stuff expensively, and you want to buy the foreign stuff cheaply. And so if the terms of trade go up, that's bad, and the terms of trade go down, that's good. That's the neoclassical situation. Now, if you have a Keynesian situation, going back, John Maynard Keynes, right? In a Keynesian situation of underemployment, it's all about jump-starting demand. You want to sell stuff. And if you sell your stuff at a low cost or at a low price, then you generate aggregate demand, and that's good. Now, we live in a world that has both sides, right? And I keep saying to people emphasizing that the value of price competitiveness, well, if you really want to make sure that you sell your stuff in large quantities, why don't you give it away for free? And this illustrates that the notion of price competitiveness is something that is not trivial, right? I mean, suppose you're really interested in selling as many Vietnamese goods as possible, then why don't you give them away for free? And that can be a good idea, right? And so, even when we are taking seriously that there may be a slack of aggregate demand in a recession, we have to be aware that in terms of trade worsening, so making imports expensive and exports cheap, is a drag on welfare. And modern macroeconomic international macro models do just that. Old Keynesian models didn't do that, and that was always a problem. Good. So this is one of the most important slides conceptually of this lecture. It's not, it's not that I, not necessarily for the exam, but it's something that you have to understand. Good. Okay, what is the result of increasing price of domestic imports relative to the price of domestic exports? Which is reflected by a real depreciation if you have a home buyers and consumption. Well, you have possibly what we call expenditure switching. Now, the idea is that if you import suppose you export cars and you import T-shirts, and that's the only goods that exist, right? So if T-shirts become more expensive relative to cars, you buy less T-shirts and buy more cars. I know that buying a car is not the same thing as buying a T-shirt, but the idea is, I think, clear, right? Expenditure switching is about the reaction to relative price changes. And the expenditure switching idea is at the heart of establishing a relationship between A, net exports and the terms of trade, and B, net exports and the real exchange rate. So the logic goes as follows. Imports become more expensive relative to exports. You buy less imports, you sell more exports, and so net exports go up. Imports become less expensive relative to exports. You import more, you export less, and net exports go down. Now, I've talked about the terms of trade, but you see there's a relationship between the terms of trade and the real exchange rate, and by the end of the day, you have that relationship between the real exchange rate and net exports. So what's important, and this is why I have that possibly, is that you have sufficiently high price elasticities of exports and imports. So the reaction of consumers to price changes has to be sufficiently large to generate the result that net exports increase if you have your terms of trade worsening, that is, if you have a real depreciation. That's called the Marshall-Lerner condition, just to store somewhere, right? This is something that it's not trivial, so there's a condition that has to be satisfied. Actually, in the short run, you may have a seemingly perverse effect. You have a real depreciation, and the real depreciation should enhance net exports, but what you see is if actually that net exports go down. That's weird. And the answer is the J-curve effect. Now, before we go into that, the J-curve effect, this is a slide that I showed you on the very first day, right? And it gives you the real effective exchange rate of the United States in price notation. So if it goes down, it's an appreciation. If it goes up, it's a depreciation. And you have net exports of goods and services of the United States relative to GDP. And what you see that in the early 80s, the dollar appreciated quite substantially, and net exports went down. And then the dollar depreciated quite substantially in the second half of the 80s, and net exports went up. So you have that effect, but you have it with a lag. And this is when the J-curve effect, right? It took a while. You had that strange effect that there was the dollar started. I don't have a laser pointer here, so that's I need, maybe I take this to extend my arm. All right, you see that the exchange rate depreciates, the dollar depreciates, and still net exports go down. And the question is, why is that? And the J-curve effect explains this. So, and a lot of countries have seen that in the wake of a real depreciation, net exports first decreasing, then increasing. So you have a real depreciation, and you expect net exports to go up, but they don't go up first, they go down. And the reason is that in the short run, quantities don't change. So you have long-term contracts, you have customer relationships, and so on. So that means that for given volumes of exports and imports, the value of exports decreases and the value of imports increases because the imports become more expensive relative to the exports. Now the quantities don't change because people in the short run do not react. And so all you see in the data is that the value of imports increases relative to the value of exports, and so net exports go down. So that's the kind of the short run reaction. In the medium and long run, of course, you do have an adjustment in the quantities, and then the value of net exports increases. So the J-curve effect is called J-curve effect because people think this looks like a J. I never really understood why, but that's the way. So you have the time of the depreciation, and instead of going up, net exports jump down, and then with a delay, they go up. And that is something, as I said, you see that in the data. You see it for the United States in several episodes. The Japanese had it over and over again. They said, well, the yen depreciated, so why don't our net exports pick up? And the answer was the J-curve effect, right? In the short run, all you get from a depreciation is that your imports become more expensive relative to exports. And then after a while, expenditure switching takes place, and people import less and export more, and then this is the second phase, right? Then this goes up. Which means that, of course, when you run a regression of net exports on the real exchange rate, you shouldn't be surprised not to get an obvious contemporaneous effect. You should have a dynamic model with a lag. Good. So let me, before I continue, let me And let me continue by saying there's another reason for a real depreciation being associated with an expansion of net exports, which is that a real depreciation may reflect a declining price of non-traded goods. And the declining price of non-traded goods shifts resources out of the non-traded goods industry into the traded goods industry, and this generates additional exports. Conversely, if non-traded goods prices go up, that is a real appreciation. That means that you produce less exportables, and that reduces net exports. So there's the terms of trade effect, and there's this non-traded over traded goods effect, both of which coexist in the real exchange rate. Alrighty. So, last point, actually next to last point, what about the nominal exchange rate? Now, the nominal exchange rate so far was kind of a variable that we didn't pay too much attention to. We said it was an ingredient of the real exchange rate, but we didn't really analyze its effect. Now, let me bring it in. So the question is, does a nominal depreciation result in an increase of the terms of trade, that is, in domestic exports becoming cheaper relative to domestic imports? This is a nerdy question, so let me put it more strongly. Does the domestic economy benefit from a nominal depreciation? So when the Vietnamese dong depreciates, is this a good thing for the domestic economy? And when the Vietnamese dong appreciates, is this a bad thing? And please be aware that this has high political relevance. I mean, among the many dubious things that are currently brought up by the US administration, currency manipulation is also one thing. So the US government accusing other countries of keeping their currencies artificially weak, right? And the question is, why should countries do that? And so what is the point of messing around with the currency? And here is an explanation which doesn't say that the current US government is right? But you might wonder, why should the nominal exchange rate matter? Well, the answer is, so why isn't this obvious? Well, the nominal exchange rate should not matter for the terms of trade if goods prices are completely flexible. That is, if firms immediately adjust their prices to fluctuations of the nominal exchange rate, such that relative prices are not affected by nominal depreciations or appreciations. That's a long text. You do have international macro models where money isn't there. Actually, you have macro models where money isn't there. And I mentioned that at the very beginning of my course, where I said the underlying assumption is monetary neutrality. If money is neutral, that is saying you have that means of exchange, but it's nothing but, oiling, greasing the wheels of the economy. It's nothing that has a real effect. And the underlying assumption is, because when the money supply doubles, prices double, and nothing changes, right? So so if you have complete price flexibility, it's very hard to argue why monetary variables, nominal exchange rates, for example, should matter at all. Now, however, there's strong evidence of delayed price adjustment. So there's nominal rigidities, or as some people call it, sticky prices. Let me show you something. I hope it's a bit risky because I have to go into one of my other lectures, but I want to show you a picture that I find is kind of fancy. I have access to the internet. Takes a long time because this is nope, I can't do that because I'm not in the VPN. Now let me go into the VPN. Okay. I'm in the VPN. Now let me try again. No? Okay, let me try whether I can find it here. Yep. Now this is the big directory of the chair of international economics in Mainz, all right? Big thing. And this is my class on international monetary economics, which is a class I'm teaching in the winter. So let me check whether we have that here. And it's a big file. I hope I'm not demanding too much from, the infrastructure. Come on. Yep. No. Kontaktaufnahme. At least it's loading. It's a big file. Let me try something else. Sorry, I never improvise in front of class. I know I shouldn't do that. But I'm just tempted to show you one picture which I find really, really illustrative. Okay. I overrated the speed of this whole internet stuff here. Come on. So, okay, that's the picture. Sorry about taking the 5 minutes. What is this? This is my favorite illustration of nominal rigidities. This is from Frankfurt Airport. So when you go to an airport, you expect that everything is digital, everything's automized, everything is super modern. Now, Frankfurt Airport, they have these coffee shops. And these guys, they write their prices on pieces of paper and then they glue it to this thing. It's almost embarrassing, but that's the way it is. Now, this is the best illustration of sticky prices because they're actually stuck to this display, right? It tells you what an Americano costs, what a cappuccino costs. By the way, translate those prices into Vietnamese dong and you will know that, Balasa Samuelson is, I mean, this is at the airport. At the airport, usually people rip you off, but that's good. Now, the point I want to make, and this is why I put so much effort into uploading it, is now suppose that monetary conditions change, right? Necessitating perhaps a price increase or a price decrease. Now, do you expect these guys to print out new price tags and to step on a ladder and deglue them here? No, they probably will wait for a while. And this is exactly what we mean by sticky prices, right? Prices do not adjust immediately. Changing prices is a pain in the neck. Here people have to print out new prices and stick them to this display. And they probably wait, right? And so we see that exchange rates move very fast, but prices do not move that fast. Now this is a little quaint episode from Frankfurt Airport, a coffee shop, but we see the same phenomenon when it comes to big things, right? What's the price of Mercedes-Benz, a certain model, right? Do they change this? Do they adjust this every day? The answer is no, they don't. And so we have a lot of evidence, including this one, sticky prices in its literal version, that illustrates that, in fact, prices are slow to adjust. So firms set prices, and then they wait, and maybe 6 months later they adjust prices because they see that circumstances have changed, and they have a board meeting, and marketing comes in, and whatever production comes in, and then they figure out what's the optimal price. Okay, so understanding the pricing and behavior of firms is, by the way, super, super interesting, right? That's something that people have devoted a lot of attention to. Now, what's the consequences? Well, or here, the crucial assumption is firms set prices before the nominal exchange rate is known, and firms do or cannot immediately adjust price to fluctuations of the nominal exchange rate. This is the sticky prices idea. And if you want to memorize sticky prices, then just think about this little coffee shop at Frankfurt Airport with the, the price is actually on little tags. Now, the implications for the terms of trade and for price competitiveness and for the real exchange rate crucially depends on the exact price setting strategy in the international context. And now I'm deviating from this Frankfurt Airport example. One strategy is called producer currency pricing. In that context, firms set prices in their own currency. So German car manufacturers set a price for a Mercedes or a BMW or an Audi or whatever, Volkswagen, in euros. And then the price that foreign customers have to pay depends on the exchange rate. That's one price setting strategy. The other price setting strategy is so-called local currency pricing. With local currency pricing, firms set prices in their customers' currency. So they sell a car to the Brits and they set a price in British pounds. Now, of course, this allows for the price deviations from the law of one price, because you have a price for the German market and you have one for the French market and a price for the UK market, and the nominal exchange rate might actually drive a wedge between these prices. So we have to assume that there's no possibility of goods arbitrage, so we need some market segmentation. So German producers have to be sure that the price that is charged in the UK is not, the price difference is not arbitraged away, and that's called pricing to market. Now, if we have producer currency pricing, then domestic firms set the price of the domestic exported good in domestic currency units, and foreign firms set the price of the foreign exported good in foreign currency units. That was a quick reading of a long sentence. So there's a price of the hat